Idi Amin Dada, born in 1928, was a Ugandan military officer and dictator who served as the third president of Uganda from 1971 to 1979. Born to a Kakwa father and Lugbara mother in Kampala, Amin's early life details are inconsistent due to the lack of written records, and many accounts of his childhood come from oral tradition. His family places his birth on Nakasero Hill, and his upbringing was influenced by both his father's military service and his mother's role as a healer. Amin joined the British colonial army in 1946, initially as a cook, but quickly rose through the ranks to become a lieutenant. He participated in the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya and British military actions in Somalia. When Uganda gained independence in 1962, Amin remained in the army, becoming commander of the Uganda Army by 1965. In 1971, facing arrest by Ugandan President Milton Obote for embezzling army funds, Amin launched a coup and declared himself president. Amin's regime quickly turned brutal. He initially maintained good relations with Western powers, particularly Israel, but by 1972 had shifted allegiances, receiving support from Libya's Muammar Gaddafi and Zaire's Mobutu Sese Seko, as well as the Soviet Union and East Germany. That same year, he expelled the Asian community from Uganda, most of whom were Indian Ugandans, severely impacting the economy. In 1975, he became chairman of the Organization of African Unity, briefly raising his international profile. As his reign continued, Amin's rule became increasingly violent and repressive. Human rights abuses, including ethnic persecution, political repression, and extrajudicial killings, became rampant. Internationally, Uganda's standing declined, especially after Amin supported Palestinian hijackers in the 1976 Entebbe raid, which led to a dramatic rescue mission by Israeli forces. Relations with the UK and other Western countries deteriorated, leading Amin to adopt the title Conqueror of the British Empire. Amin's downfall began in 1978 when he attempted to annex Tanzania's Kagera region, sparking the Uganda-Tanzania War. In 1979, Tanzanian forces, along with Ugandan rebels, captured Kampala, forcing Amin to flee. He first sought refuge in Libya, then Iraq, and eventually settled in Saudi Arabia, where he lived in exile until his death in 2003. The exact number of people killed under Amin's regime is uncertain, but estimates range between 100,000 and 500,000. His rule left Uganda economically devastated, and he is remembered as one of the most brutal dictators in modern history, notorious for his nepotism, corruption, and mismanagement of the country's resources. Amin's early life remains largely speculative, with conflicting reports about his birth year and upbringing. His family claims he was born in 1928 at the Shimoni police barracks in Kampala, named after the Muslim holiday Eid al-Adha. Amin's father, a former soldier in the British King's African Rifles, and his mother, a traditional healer, both played significant roles in shaping his early years. Rumors about Amin's paternity, speculated to involve Bugandan royalty, were a source of tension in his family, eventually leading to his parents' separation. As a boy, Amin received minimal formal education, attending an Islamic school before leaving in the 4th grade. He worked various odd jobs before being recruited into the British colonial army, where his military career would ultimately shape his path to power. His rise from a relatively modest background to becoming one of the world's most infamous dictators highlights the complex and tumultuous nature of his life and leadership in Uganda. Early military career in the King's African Rifles, KAR. Idi Amin joined the King's African Rifles, KAR, in 1946 as an assistant cook, though he also received military training. He falsely claimed later to have fought in the Burma campaign of World War II. By 1947, he was transferred to Kenya for infantry service and became involved in anti-insurgency operations against Somali rebels and the Mau Mau uprising in Kenya. In 1959, he rose to the highest rank for a black soldier in the KAR, and in 1961, he was commissioned as one of Uganda's first 2 black officers. Rise in Uganda's army post-independence. After Uganda gained independence in 1962, Amin quickly climbed the ranks, becoming Deputy Army Commander in 1964 and Commander of the Armed Forces by 1970. His athletic abilities, including being a champion boxer and rugby player, added to his reputation in the military. By the mid-1960s, Amin was implicated in smuggling ivory and gold, leading to political tensions with Uganda's Prime Minister Milton Obote. Conflict with Obote. Amin's involvement in smuggling scandals led to a rift between him and Obote. By 1969, tensions had escalated after an assassination attempt on Obote. When Obote moved to reduce Amin's influence in 1970, Amin planned a coup. In January 1971, while Obote was out of the country, Amin seized power in a military coup, accusing the government of corruption and promising reforms. Amin seizes power and declares himself president. A week after the coup, Amin declared himself Uganda's president, dissolving elements of the constitution and setting up military tribunals above civil law. Amin began filling key government positions with military personnel and ruled by decree, issuing about 30 decrees during his rule. He also quickly moved to purge political opponents, particularly targeting supporters of Obote. Purges and ethnic targeting. Amin's regime quickly became infamous for violent purges, particularly targeting the Akoli and Lango ethnic groups who had been loyal to Obote. Many soldiers from these ethnic groups were killed in barracks massacres, and civilians were also targeted. Over his 8-year reign, Amin's brutal tactics expanded to include killings of other ethnic groups, journalists, intellectuals, and foreign nationals. Estimates of those killed range from 80,000 to 500,000. Blood rituals and cannibalism allegations. There were widespread reports, including from former government ministers, of Amin practicing cannibalism and engaging in blood rituals, influenced by the traditions of his ethnic group, the Kakwa. These allegations, along with his violent and erratic behavior, contributed to his fearsome image as a dictator. Consolidation of power through ethnic favoritism. Amin solidified his rule by recruiting his followers from his own ethnic group, the Kakwa, and from South Sudanese and Nubians. By 1977, these groups dominated the military and the government, with Muslims making up only 5% of the population, holding a disproportionate amount of power in his administration. Economic war and expulsion of Asians. In 1972, Amin declared an economic war targeting Uganda's Asian community, expelling 60,000 Asians, most of whom were business owners and key contributors to the economy. Their properties were expropriated and given to Amin's supporters, leading to economic collapse as industries faltered without experienced leadership. The expulsion had disastrous effects on Uganda's economy, which was already in decline. International isolation and defections. Amin's regime became increasingly isolated internationally. Key figures in his government, including Finance Minister Emmanuel Wakwe and Health Minister Henry Kayemba, defected to the UK. Kayemba published A State of Blood, an insider account of Amin's brutal regime, which further tarnished Amin's international reputation. Amin's decline and declaration as president for life. By 1976, Idi Amin had declared himself president for life. His regime's brutality, mismanagement, and economic disasters led to growing internal dissent and external pressure, but Amin managed to hold on to power through fear, violence, and favoritism within the military. His rule, however, was nearing its end as opposition grew both within and outside of Uganda. In 1976, during the inauguration of William Talbot as Liberia's 20th president, Idi Amin's regime was already controversial but initially supported by Western powers like the UK and Israel. Amin was seen as a pro-Western figure due to his military background in the British-led King's African Rifles and was favored by the West after Obote's socialist policies alienated capitalist interests. Early on, he received military and financial aid from these Western countries, but their refusal to supply more advanced equipment pushed Amin to seek alliances elsewhere, particularly with Libya under Muammar Gaddafi. Amin's ties with Israel ended after his visit to Libya, where Gaddafi promised a $25 million loan, conditional on Amin's denouncement of Zionism. This realignment was followed by his expulsion of Israeli personnel from Uganda and severing diplomatic relations. Gaddafi's support also extended to mediating peace between Uganda and Sudan, with Uganda ending its support for southern Sudanese rebels, many of whom were integrated into Amin's army. A major move in Amin's economic war was the 1972 expulsion of Asians, mostly of Indian descent, which led to India severing diplomatic ties with Uganda. This was accompanied by the nationalization of British businesses and a complete break with the UK, leading to a loss of trade with both Israel and Britain. However, Amin quickly replaced this with support from Libya, the US, and the Soviet Union, which saw strategic value in Uganda to counterbalance Western and Chinese influence in the region. The Soviet Union became a significant arms supplier to Uganda by 1975, providing tanks, jets, and artillery, alongside financial aid. Uganda's ties with the Eastern Bloc deepened, with several Ugandans receiving military training in countries like Czechoslovakia. East Germany also played a key role in Uganda's intelligence and security agencies, although later tried to distance itself after Uganda's invasion of Tanzania. Amin's regime was marked by bizarre public relations stunts, such as his sarcastic Save Britain Fund during the 1973-1975 global recession. He also offered to mediate peace talks in Northern Ireland, positioning Uganda as a neutral mediator due to its colonial history with Britain, though this offer was not taken seriously. In 1976, Amin gained global notoriety by allowing hijackers from the Palestinian PFLPO to land a hijacked Air France flight at Entebbe. Israel launched a rescue mission, Operation Thunderbolt, freeing most of the hostages and killing the hijackers and many Ugandan soldiers. The incident worsened Uganda's relations with Israel and the UK, leading to further isolation. Amin retaliated against Kenya for its support of the Israeli raid by ordering mass killings of Kenyans in Uganda, further straining regional relations. In January 1977, Idi Amin appointed General Mustafa Adrizi as vice president, but the Uganda army soon split between supporters of Amin and those loyal to Adrizi. Tensions grew when Adrizi, who wanted to purge foreigners from the military, was injured in a car accident in 1978, and Amin stripped him of power. Political unrest followed, as many of Adrizi's followers suspected an assassination attempt. Amin's government became more unstable with increasing dissent within the military and the public, partly due to economic collapse and political purges. In November 1978, a mutiny by Adrizi's supporters led to fighting along the Tanzanian border. The Uganda army invaded Tanzanian territory under unclear circumstances, which Amin either ordered or accepted post facto to maintain control. Amin accused Tanzanian President Julius Nyerere of initiating the war and declared the annexation of Kagera. However, when Tanzania mobilized for a counteroffensive, Amin attempted to defuse the situation, even suggesting a boxing match with Nyerere to settle the conflict, which Nyerere ignored. By January 1979, Tanzania launched a full-scale counterattack, joined by Ugandan exiles. Despite support from Libya and the Palestine Liberation Organization, Amin's army suffered heavy losses. After the Battle of Lukaya, Amin refused to step down despite pleas from his commanders. When Kampala fell on April 11, 1979, Amin fled the capital and, after a failed attempt to regroup his forces, fled Uganda. Amin first escaped to Libya and eventually settled in Saudi Arabia, where he was granted asylum on the condition that he remain out of politics. While in exile, Amin continued to fund remnants of his army involved in Uganda's ongoing civil conflict. Despite occasional calls for his return to Uganda, he remained in Saudi Arabia, where he lived quietly. In 1989, Amin attempted to return to political relevance by flying to Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of Congo, to organize a rebel force, but he was arrested and expelled. After an appeal by Morocco's King Hassan II, Saudi Arabia allowed Amin to return, where he lived under strict conditions, prohibited from any political activity or media appearances. Amin's health deteriorated in the early 2000s, and in July 2003, he fell into a coma due to kidney failure. His family decided to disconnect him from life support, and Amin died on August 16, 2003, in Jeddah. His burial was simple, without fanfare, marking the quiet end of a once notorious and brutal dictator. Idi Amin's legacy in Uganda is deeply intertwined with the militarism he fostered, which remains a significant aspect of the country's culture. While internationally he is infamous for his brutal regime, within Uganda, perceptions of Amin are more nuanced. Some Ugandans view him as a patriot, particularly for his decision to expel Asians from the country, though many also condemn his violent rule. His son, Jaffa Remo, has publicly criticized the negative portrayal of his father and called for an investigation into the abuses attributed to Amin's regime. Amin has been the subject of extensive coverage in popular culture, often portrayed as both a brutal dictator and a bizarre, almost comical figure. His life and rule have been explored in various media, including the 1974 documentary General Idi Amin Dada, a self-portrait, and the 1981 film Rise and Fall of Idi Amin. His character became central to the novel The Last King of Scotland by Giles Foden, which was later adapted into a film in 2006. Forrest Whitaker's portrayal of Amin in the movie earned him several prestigious awards, including an Academy Award for Best Actor, solidifying Amin's presence in global popular culture.